Welcome into the September 28th episode of the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. We got a preseason game to preview tonight between the Leafs and Les Habitants. There's a major injury update to fill you guys in on, and we review Auston Matthews' first pitch at the Toronto Blue Jays game, and also Dave's performance at Les Blue Jays game. All that and more coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, one-stop shop for all things Leafs. I'm your host, Mike DiStefano from TSN 1050 Toronto Radio, also known as Al's brother on TSN's Overdrive and TSN 1050's Leafs Lunch. Joining me, it's my co-host, Dave Morassutti from Sportsnet, also writer for the NHLPA. Locked On Leafs is a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast, so be sure to subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts from. You can also now catch us up on video format on YouTube. Search up Locked On Leafs on YouTube. Hit subscribe and get new daily content each and every day, Monday through Friday, from him and I. And speaking of him being David Morassutti, my co-host, Buds, you were at the Jays game. Auston Matthews is at the Jays game. Who do you think put on a better performance? Him and his pitch, or you and your dogs, my guy?
What did we set the over-under for hot dogs for me at this game? Do we even put what?
I'm trying to remember what we said. Oh, no. We might have to go back and listen to the last episode. But I feel like that gave you something like maybe 10, 8 or 10.
I hit 9.
Ooh, so that was a good over-under. Was around 8 to 10. So you hit 9 dogs.
Easily,
all right.
Too, I'm going to say. I underestimated how small these things were.
So I've never gone to Loonie Dog Night down at the Dome. Can you order like as many as you want in one go? Like you just go up there and be like, can I get 14 hot dogs, please? And they'll just give you 14 hot dogs.
So I went with the family, right? And she got 15 hot dogs in one shot.
So you can just order as many as you want. You're like, I'm going to force myself to scarf down 24 of these bad boys. Give me 24 dogs, please. And they'll just plop.
I think
go.
They do have a limit of like 20. I think that's the limit. But like,
okay.
you gotta stop somewhere, I guess.
I guess at 19 you should be able to stop yourself there. That's pretty impressive though. 9 hot dogs is a pretty good performance, I must say. So hats off to you. But that was not the stunning moment of your night, David. We got to pull this up because I challenged you. In the last episode. I said, dude, if you're going down to the game for dollar dog night, you got to get the dunk in there and see how it tastes. So let's show the viz. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it here. If not, go find the YouTube video or go to our Twitter at Locked On Leafs, where Dave's uploaded the video of himself dunking his hot dog in the beer and then giving it a go and just hit play. Because what you had to describe this and what you compared this to is lunacy, and I'm consider stripping you of your Italianness, my friend. Hit play, please.
Because of the peer pressure, thanks, Mike. I'm going to do the dipping of the... Oh, this better be good.
Yeah. That looks good. It has to be
It's like dipping your cookie in the coffee. Not bad.
Cookie in the coffee, Dave? Was it like 1 to 10? Scale of 1 to 10. What was your dunked dog on a scale of 1 to 10? How'd it taste?
So I don't know if you could hear in the background my buddy literally saying, just like a biscotti, man. Literally he's saying that as I'm doing it. I had a lot of apprehension about doing this, and it was not that bad.
No.
The greatest thing ever, but obviously it helped that there wasn't any condiments on it because that would have been disgusting.
I would imagine the bun is the worst part. Just like the soggy beer infested bun would be the worst part.
The bun was, I mean, luckily it wasn't like a thick bun. It was a nice, the buns you get for the hot dogs are not too bad.
Yeah.
That makes it a little bit, it feels weird, but the taste itself, unless you have like a specific, like I could only get Mill Street organic beer. So like, it's not like I'm taking a beer that has some like weird flavors to it and it's like infusing with the hot dog. It's just a regular Mill
Right.
Street organic. So
Right.
that's what I think made it taste not too bad.
Yeah. Well, I gotta give it to you, man. You did it. You didn't want to, but you did it for the show. You did it for the pod, and well, now you can say that you've dunked a dog in a beer and lived to tell the tale. So now you got a story. I'm curious how many people like were watching you and not knowing what was going on, and they're like, "Is that guy dunking his hot dog in the beer? He is a lunatic." I hope somebody went home and is telling a story about how they saw some weirdo doing dunking their dog today. But
Better than dunking your chicken fingers in the Coke. I don't know if you remember that one.
oh yeah, oh yeah, that's up there. That's up there for things you should never ever do.
No,
Although dunking your hot dog in your beer is also probably something that most normal people don't ever do either.
unless you're Joey
But
Chestnut.
yeah, well, that's water, not beer. That
I've seen
he's
him
not
do it in
wasting
beer.
the beer.
Or who used to do it in the beer? Somebody used to do that.
Not Chestnut. He's all that's all water. You dunk it in the water and you just shove it in your mouth. It's repulsive, really, what Joey Chestnut does with hot dogs. Compared to I guess what you did. But Auston Matthews was down there to throw the first pitch. You got down there in time to watch it?
I legitimately, we got through the gate. Our section was right at the gate. I planned this perfectly. We get through the aisle, and there's our boy on the mound. Like, we get there as he's getting on the mound. I was like, you could not ask for better timing.
He wasn't on the mound though, David, and that bothers me because earlier in the day, he was speaking with the Leafs media brass, and said he planned on throwing from the rubber. He did not. He threw from in front of the mound. I'm upset. I'm upset. I thought he
It
was going to try and throw from the rubber. I thought he was going to maybe try and throw some heat. Neither happened. Threw from in front, kind of lobbed it in. Didn't even get a strike call.
got a high. It was a high. I got, you want it? You want to see the video?
Yeah, let's show the video to the people.
I like you. I was also a little bit surprised that of his performance with this.
Of course, though. That getting a little weird. Yeah, you couldn't really see it there, but it did. It was very high, high and away. Is what that pitch was. So for a guy who used to play baseball, I kind of expected a little better. He did say that he wasn't the greatest pitcher when he did play. He was a catcher back in his heyday. Although his father was a pitcher, so I thought maybe he would be all right. But yeah, I guess he chose the right decision to stick with hockey over baseball, if that's the case right there. But hey, still pretty cool to have Auston Matthews in the building. Pretty big game, right? And having the Yankees in town September. There's the race for the postseason. Although the Blue Jays ultimately lost the game, it was still probably a pretty cool atmosphere and a good buzz having Matthews in there, a chance for Judge to make history. And then, just another opportunity for the Blue Jays to also keep adding to their win totals on the year. None of that actually ended up happening, but I'm sure it still would have been a pretty sweet atmosphere. All right, let's get into some Leafs news because there was a significant injury update that we got to make here, Dave. So why don't we take a quick break and we get back? I'll update it and say who it is and how impactful it could potentially be. Before we get into that news, though, let me tell you about one of today's show sponsors, and that's betonline.net. It's your number one source for football betting this season. Also, the NHL. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every single game. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute score updates for each and every sport. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including the NHL, the MLB, MMA, boxing, and even golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. And if you were betting on the amount of injuries that were going to occur early on in camp and you took the under, you've lost already, my friend. Injuries keep piling up, and the latest one I would say is most definitely the most concerning one, and the one that is going to be most impactful. John Tavares out with an oblique strain, a minimum of 3 weeks, according to Sheldon Keefe. Your initial thoughts on that news there, Dave?
Well, it's just so unfortunate when you hear it's an oblique strain. I've heard of players getting oblique, like athletes getting oblique strains, doing the weirdest reasons, right? Those just kind of just pop up out of nowhere. There's not really a particular way to avoid getting an oblique strain. I'll just say that.
Dude, I feel like
So,
I get an oblique strain sometimes by like putting on my seatbelt. I'll be honest.
well, like I heard, like guys just like they just twist one way and
Yeah. I mean, like on the ice, right? Like you're turning up ice, a turnover, you have to turn quick. I mean, yeah, you could definitely strain something there.
yeah, it's just when you heard that he was like first initially is like John Tavares wasn't there with an upper body injury, and you're like, oh, and then you hear it's on a bleach string, you're just like, oh, like just the one thing you don't want to have happen just as the season's about to get started.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just such a. I know, like, there's been so much said about Tavares too during the offseason stuff that it's just like, guy doesn't need this right now.
No, and it's unfortunate because a lot of the conversation that we were having trying to stay positive about Tavares was the fact that he was healthy, right? He had a healthy off season and he was feeling good. He was able to train and able to get stronger, and hopefully he was able to work on his speed, his skating a little bit, simply just because he was healthy and able to train. Now he comes into the season with an injury, and if he's out 3 weeks, I mean, that probably takes him out of the first week of the regular season. This is a minimum 3 weeks, so reevaluate him after that, and then you've got, okay, so if he's out 3 weeks and he returns, now he's been off the ice for 3 weeks, and he hasn't been, training, and he hasn't really been in game shape. He's gonna have to try and ramp it right back up, with the season already underway, so extremely unideal for John Tavares. This is definitely an injury that nobody wanted to see happen. I mean, I would say outside of Auston Matthews and Mitch Marner, definitely to me, this is the biggest injury that the Maple Leafs could potentially get. And when you take a look at the center depth now with Tavares out of the lineup, it's pretty bleak and weak, isn't it, Dave?
Yeah, this is why, like, you're right in terms of the order of players, because it's not like you have a guy that's up to John Tavares' standard to replace him with. This is why all this idea of trading John Tavares is like, okay, sure, trade John Tavares. And who are you going to get to replace him as as a second line center? You can't just, and you look at the lineups and the lines like, oh, it looks like this will likely be Alexander Kerfoot and Kelly Yarncroke's duty to replace John Tavares. Is like, that's not a good thing, guys. You can get by with it for a week, a few games, but over a long-term period, that's not what you expect your lineup to look like. It's a huge downgrade.
Yeah, I mean, if it's only like a week or 10 days or something like that, yes, you could get away probably with a Kerfoot or a Yarncroc. Maybe you slide Willie inside at center. You might be able to get away with it just because the rest of your lineup can be strong enough to withstand some, an injury like that. But long term, Kerfoot is not a second line center. He's barely a second line winger on this club, let alone, have the two-way responsibilities. So it's definitely concerning, but he's the guy who probably will be given the most opportunity to run away with that 2C role with John Tavares out. And, in the game tonight, he's going to end up centering a line with Denny Mulligan and also William Nylander. And, I could see that legitimately being like the opening night second line for this Maple Leafs team. And that's why they want to get a look at it. Like that could potentially be the situation, funny enough. But definitely like there's been so much, discourse about, oh, you gotta try and buy out Tavares, move Tavares, trade him. I think all it took was a 3-week injury in preseason for us to be like, maybe not so fast because it's a little thin. And now, like, I'm also thinking to myself, is Kerfoot even like an expendable piece to this team? Because if an injury occurs to one of Tavares or Matthews, if you trade Kerfoot and one of these guys is out for, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks, now all of a sudden, who's the guy who's going to fill in if you end up trading Kerfoot away? Right now, it's like, okay, Yarncroke as a second line center. Is that really the guy who we're going to be leaning on? And it's unfortunate because last year, a player who you felt somewhat comfortable with in a role like this, like when Matthews got injured and he missed 3 or 5 games or something like that in the middle of the year. Jason Spezza was a player who could slide up and play on that second line, and you felt comfortable with it because he knew that role, right? Was he a second liner at that point in his career? No, but for a couple of games, you felt okay with it. He's not there anymore. You don't really have like a fourth line veteran center who you say, okay, he can go up and spot you a couple of games. So if there's no Kerfoot and you end up trading him away for cap reasons, which has been suggested multiple times, also by us on this podcast, to be honest, like we'll call ourselves out. We've said that's a possibility, to get under the cap. That is one of the names that keep coming up. But now I'm thinking, man, they're just not deep enough down the middle for them to really actually move Alex Kerfoot. Although he is likely to play the wing for most of the year, if an injury were to occur, he's that automatic option to slide into your top 6 center. And after that, it is dicey, man.
Well, and you look at, you move a Kerfoot up to the second line, you can get away with Yarncroke being the third line center and Kampf being the fourth line center. That's fine, and it's just not great because then that puts a lot of pressure on the wingers to really pick things up offensively and defensively too. So this is where I think the Leafs just have to find ways to start bringing in some younger guys with more upside through the system. So they say, okay, Tavares is out. We got a young guy in the wings. Now, you can't, it's been so hard to get a true legitimate top 6 center. Look at what the Leafs had to do to get them. Draft one first overall, sign the other guy for $11 million.
Yeah.
Like,
they did have Nazem Kadri, who they let
again,
go, but
I mean, at this stage, Nazem Kadri is proven to be not a guy that you can sign for $4.5 million. When he was here for 4.5, that was perfect in
he
terms
was
of,
making 4.5 up until literally this year.
yeah.
So. But yeah, I understand what you're saying here.
Like that's where you have to kind of, this is, I think, maybe at some point it may have to be a little bit of a wake-up call to Kyle Dubas to say, look, if one of our other guys like a William Nylander or Mitch Marner isn't able to make that move, like they got to find a way eventually at some point to say this needs to be a priority for us, because to lose John Tavares, and we've seen even with Auston Matthews out of the lineup, the drawback and the follow from that, it really does impact what this team can do.
Yeah.
Now, people will say, well, if certain guys weren't making a lot of money, maybe you could go out and get another guy. But again, who are you going to get in free agency? It's so tough because the dollar amounts that these top 6 guys want, like
Yeah.
who's the guy that you can realistically say the last few years in free, like even
Well, I'll give you one that I made a claim for right here on the show in the summer, and you'll remember this, but you'll recall I was clamoring the Leafs should sign Paul Stastny. Do you remember me bringing that up when we were talking
Yep.
about kind of our top 5 free agent targets? Paul Stastny was a guy who I thought is versatile in a way where, and he only signed for I think $1.5 million in Carolina, so a feasible contract too. It looks like he was willing to take for a contender, and he's somebody who can play versatile, plays the wing, plays down the middle. And if there was an injury to that top six, to one of Matthews or to Tavares, like we're seeing now, he's a logical option for who you can kind of fill in as your number 2 center and feel comfortable with it, right? Obviously, they did not make that decision to sign him, or he didn't want to sign here, whichever one. I'm not really sure, to be quite honest with you. But regardless, he's not here in Toronto. But that was one of the guys, and that was the type of player, the role that I thought the Maple Leafs needed to go after this year was somebody who you feel comfortable playing on the second line, who has versatility at both the wing and center position, because there just wasn't much depth, something in between your Kerfoot and Tavares, and they just never got that. And now we're sitting here, Tavares, it's only 3 weeks, and it's only going to most likely be 1 week of the season, unless further complications occur. But at right now, it's 3 weeks. But if another injury occurs, or if this is a lingering situation, or if Tavares doesn't bounce back the way that we're hoping he does, it's a thin center group here in Toronto. It really, really is, and it's shown. And we haven't even gotten to October 12th yet for puck drop at Game 1.
We even brought up another name at one point in the offseason, and there was a lot of talk that it could have been a possibility with Dylan Strome.
Yes, another one. Yes.
He signed for 1 year, $3.5 million. Would have been an RFA at the end. Is still an RFA at the end of that deal with Washington. And I'm just like, so you're telling me Dylan Strome, who's younger, probably has more offensive upside, had a pretty okay year in Chicago, considering that they were a tire fire of a team, and he only went for $3.5 million on a 1 year deal.
Same amount of money on Alex Kerfoot's current deal.
Exactly. And that's where that irked me a lot, because it's just like, if the Leafs are constantly going to say, oh, we have Kerfoot, we don't need Dylan Strome, the whole idea is you need to get better than Alexander Kerfoot. Yes. And that's the frustration that I have, is that these guys are out there. Dylan Strome's a hometown guy. You can't tell me this guy wouldn't have loved to play at home.
Yeah.
The Leafs were probably trying to get him cheaper than what Washington paid. And that's the frustrating part there. 3.5 million, I would take that.
From what I was told, is he was very much interested in coming to Toronto. And to your point, I think ultimately the contract that was offered to him wasn't really all that close. I don't know for fact, but based on the information that I was told and how things kind of ended up playing out afterwards, it seems as though the contract that they offered probably didn't stack up anywhere near the contract offer that he got from Washington, which is why he ended up going elsewhere and not coming to Toronto. And I mean, hey, that's that's one of the big reasons why Kyle Dubas does get a little bit of hate. Well, a lot of hate a lot of the time from this fan base, or from, certain pockets of this fan base, is because he dug himself a big old hole, given the big money deals out to these players, and it hasn't allowed him to do much the last couple of seasons. Granted, he did not expect a pandemic to hit and a flat cap to occur, but it did happen, and he's had to navigate those waters, and it's been difficult for him to try and create, a whole lot of depth, especially at certain positions up front and the middle six area, I guess. And here we are, in a situation where one of the big boys goes down, and there's not a proper replacement to kind of slide in there that you feel totally comfortable with. Now, there's not a whole lot of teams out there that really have that, I would say, but there's also only a handful of Stanley Cup contenders, and Toronto's one of them. So you would expect them to have the depth to withstand an injury like this, and unfortunately, it just kind of doesn't look like they do. All right, let's take one more quick break, Dave, and when we get back, let's kind of preview tonight's game. Leafs-Habs preseason game 3, I suppose, the 2 on the weekend. This will be the 3rd game. It's going to be the first time we'll get to see Matt Murray in a Maple Leafs uniform, and we'll take a look at the rest of the roster as the Maple Leafs sent out who's going to be playing in this game. So we'll do that, tee up the game, and a bit of an update also on the salary cap over the next couple of years. That more coming up on the other side here on the Locked On Leafs podcast. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. We are the hosts here at the Locked On Leafs podcast. And Dave, before we get into Leafs Habs, did you see the good news about the salary cap? I was gonna say my friend, my guy, my guy. Did you see the news?
I did. I did see the reporting from Elliot Friedman that it's coming, but it's probably not coming as soon as we want it to come. But I think the Bill Daly kind of gave us a bit of a preview that it's coming. You're just gonna have to wait for it.
Well, it could grow as much as they're saying, reportedly, 10 million over the next 3 years. So they're expecting another $1 million increase next season. And then after that, a bit more of a jump to roughly 87 million potentially. And then it could get as high as 92 million 3 years from now. And that 87 number is important because that's the season that both William Nylander and Auston Matthews are up for contracts. So, an extra, 4.5, 5-ish million in cap, 2 years from now, that should help with those players and trying to get those guys signed to contract extensions. So knowing that it's going to be going up a little bit, could go up $4 or so million more from next year to the year after. I think is definitely really good news for the Maple Leafs, Kyle Dubas, and Leaf fans if they plan on trying to keep this team intact and try and build also and try and win themselves a Stanley Cup or compete for a Stanley Cup. Heck, let's take a round at this point. All right, tonight Leafs Habs preseason matchup, 7 o'clock down at Scotiabank Arena. Hopefully, some of y'all listening are going to the game. There was like 14,000 people at the games last weekend. I'm curious to see what it looks like on a Wednesday evening. But Leafs Habs, always a good matchup, no matter what. Even if it's preseason, it's still marquee because it's Leafs and Habs. You want to pull up the tweet that was sent out by the Maple Leafs, just kind of notifying us who's going to be playing tonight. So they didn't necessarily give us the lines, so we're going to have to kind of, I guess, assume what the lines are going to look like. But I think what we can assume based on practice today, that the first line is going to be Alex Kerfoot with Danny Mulligan and William Nylander. So yesterday, it was John Tavares who was centering that line. And then obviously with the injury, Kerfoot slides up there and looks like they're going to get a run. And I would assume that that's for good reason. They think this potentially, if there is an injury to, I guess there is the injury, but with the injury to John Tavares, this is a line they could foresee potentially starting the year with as that second line. Let's see if they can build some chemistry right off the hop. Did you kind of get the sense of that potentially being the case with this lineup?
Yeah, I've also seen it could potentially be Pontus Holmberg. He was there during practice, but again, yeah, it could just be this is Kerfoot with the injury now. Now Sheldon Keefe has to think about getting this line a little bit more up to speed, or at least getting Kerfoot and up to speed with playing center in that position as in the top six. Because right now there's really no sense of having him playing a bottom six role, considering he's going to be needed to play top six. You might as well get him those reps now. With I understand there's like another 5 preseason games left, 4 or 5 preseason games left.
Yeah,
but you got to get the preseason is not just for that; it's for trying different people out. I would kind of like to see what a Pontus Holmberg. We saw him play with Nylander and Mulligan already, so I'm. It's not like they need to. It hasn't been tried yet, and that's why I'm thinking it should, as you mentioned, it should be Kerfoot because he hasn't played in that role yet.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the practice lines from yesterday. So you're correct that Holmberg did practice alongside Mulligan and Nylander. That being said, Kerfoot was not with this group. He was in the second group that had come out to play, and I think it'll end up being Kerfoot over Holmberg because that's the more likely player to end up getting those second line duties. And now you kind of got to get him ready for that and get him some minutes. So I would think that that we'll end up seeing Kerfoot over Holmberg, and Holmberg's still going to play. Obviously, he's on this roster right now, but where is he going to play? I guess we'll have to wait for tomorrow exactly to see where that whole thing kind of situates. I will say this though, when it comes to like Kerfoot and Nylander, like if they have to play, a week or two without John Tavares, they had a really good stretch in the playoffs against Montreal Canadiens when Tavares got injured. Do you recall that? Like Kerfoot and Nylander were the top line of that series for the Maple Leafs. Maybe they could try and rekindle some of that magic, and Denny Mulligan could play the Alex Galchenyuk role as the castaway who kind of comes in and plays some solid foundational hockey. And I talked about a piece in the Athletic by Haley Salvian about Mulligan yesterday on the show, and I recall also reading in that piece, she had talked to Peter Gromberg, who was his head coach with Zurich last year in the Swiss League. And apparently, Mulligan was straight up with Gromberg and said, "Hey, I want to get to the NHL. It's the best league in the world. That's where I want to get to." And Gromberg said, "Okay, whatever we do this year will be to try and help you at that level in that league," and really helped him with his two-way game. I know that the NHL is a completely different beast than the Swiss league, but the fact that there was that wherewithal for Mulligan knowing where in his game he needs to improve in order to play in the NHL, I think he'll be given a good look and a good run here in the top six to see if perhaps something will translate and something did perhaps maybe click while he was over in Switzerland and can translate into the NHL. So that is a line tonight that I especially will be keying in on to see if those two-way abilities that he supposedly had worked on over the last couple of seasons can kind of shine through.
By the way, anybody dissing the Swiss League, let's not forget that that's where Auston Matthews played before he came to the NHL. So
Yeah.
maybe give it a little more respect. I know it's not the NHL, but it's not nothing hockey as well. So that was my first point when you brought that up, and I did see some comments about that on YouTube. We read the comments, we take notice. But yeah, no, I think this is a guy who understood that he had unfinished business with the Leafs, right? The trade with Mason Marchment, and we talked about how, and even we talked about on this podcast that that's a trade maybe Kyle Dubas would think twice about. Well, Malgin's back, and he can make people maybe rethink their thought on that if he were to prove to be, that this his work in Switzerland does prepare him better for the NHL than he was when he first joined the Leafs.
Yeah, potentially, and well, we'll be able to get a look at him tonight against the Habs. Anything else about this lineup kind of stick out to you that you're excited to watch tonight?
Um, we saw Tavares kind of pump Fraser Minton's tires quite a bit. We talked about that, and I want to see how he does with the little pep talk from the coach and the captain there.
Is he? I don't know if he's on this roster. Actually, I don't think he's
Actually,
playing
now that
tonight.
I look at it, I don't see him because he was in the
He's in
line
Group One.
rushes.
Yeah, he was in Group One line rushes, but
Yeah,
the
now that I
Group
see,
1 and Group 2, for whatever reason, they're just combining and playing whomever. They're not sticking to the groups for this
no,
game, which did make it a little confusing when this came out initially.
I will say Curtis Douglas.
Yeah, big
Just
boy.
to see this 6'9"
Yeah.
beast of a player. I want to see. I didn't really keen in too much on him in the early preseason games. I want to see how he does. I don't know what the Habs lineup's going to look like. I probably should have looked. I probably should have looked at that. But I want to see. I want to see what he can do because again, this is a guy with some size. This is somebody that when we're talking about Wayne Simmons and if he can stick to the lineup, Curtis Douglas is a guy that's trying to bump Wayne Simmons down. He's the one that's trying to take his spot. So I'm curious to see how that kind of plays out there. And then, yeah, will the Jordy Ben and Morgan Riley experiment actually be something that I can actually watch with my eyes, or am I going to be like, please never again?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I have a little bit more faith in Jordy Ben, I suppose, than you do. Like, he's a good veteran, definitely a good veteran in the league who can play both sides. But yeah, it would not be ideal if Jordy Ben is on the Leafs' first pair, and I don't expect him to be, but he could very well be on the third pair to start the season, especially with all these injuries that the Leafs have now accrued. But looks like TJ Brody and Mark Giordano both going to be skating on a pair together, so they'll be reunited for the first time in a couple of seasons. That'll be exciting. But I think probably outside of taking a peek at that top line that we had discussed with Kerfoot, Nylander, and Mulligan, Matt Murray getting his first start, his first look as a Toronto Maple Leaf in that sweater. Do you think there's a lot of pressure on Matt Murray to perform, given that Samsonov pitched a shutout in his 40 minutes of action over the weekend?
Well, I just remember like with Freddie Anderson in the preseason, he would go on there would be like a stretch where he just let in a few bad goals, and you're just like, oh, there's Freddie. Like I think there's definitely how I don't see how there's not pressure on Matt Murray just because of the trade and
Yeah, let me let me
you know,
let me let me ask you this. Let me ask you this.
okay.
If Matt Murray goes in there tonight and he lets in, let's say, 5 goals in 40 minutes, or let's say 4 goals in 40 minutes, are you worried? Or does it matter? Does it not matter that much because it's game one for him in the preseason?
It would not be a good look. That's like it would no way to look to not say that it's not. Like, you can't say, "Oh, it's not. It's okay." It wouldn't be great. If it was something that okay, he has this game and maybe he doesn't perform well, but then in the next game he does better, then that's something. This is why I can't look at just one game. You have to kind of look at it in stretches. Samsonov, yes, he did very well in those 40 minutes. He could very much do not do well in a full 60 minutes that he plays on Friday. That's totally possible. That's why you have to with goaltending. It should be over a stretch and not just a one game, trial
Exactly.
run or period when you're evaluating them, in my opinion. So yeah, if Murray lets in 4 goals tonight, not gonna be thrilled about it. Like you can't say just not a good night for him. I
I
get
guess,
that.
if I'm gonna go glass half full, I guess, and or play devil's advocate and
Mhm.
take the other approach here, you can make the argument, like, look at the lineup in front of him, I guess, right?
Sure.
Like, this isn't the lineup that will be defending. I mean, outside of, I guess, Riley, Brody, and Gio, like Tommy Miller is going to be out there tonight. You already mentioned Jordy Ben, who you're not very high on. Dahlstrom and Mete are going to be out there tonight as a third pair, probably play 15 minutes or so. Up front offensively, you don't have the big trio, I suppose, in Matthews, Marner, Bunting. Clearly, you're not going to have Tavares, who's out with injury. Instead, you've got guys like Curtis Douglas. You've got guys like Bobby McMahon and Nicholas Robertson and Alex Steves. A couple guys who, by the way, also I think will want to try and make some impressions tonight. I think Robertson especially needs to start impressing if he wants to try and get himself a roster spot, by the way. So that's just another aside. But when it comes to Matt Murray, that's kind of the saving grace where if he does have a bad game, it's like, the system in front, the players playing in front of him aren't going to be the same guys that will be there come opening night when they really need them. The same, defensive core that was what, sixth last year in expected goals against. So that should be something you kind of hang your hat on, I guess, if it does go a little south early on for Matt Murray.
Yeah. I'm the I want to give Matt Murray every chance to try to turn things around because he came from a team that was just very poor, especially on the defensive side. He's coming into a new situation, new expectations. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt to get things going, which is why if he does have a bad game, I'm not going to lose my mind over it. That's why I'm gonna take this in sequences. I'm not gonna just let this be a one game thing. It would be the wrong thing to do for him, and it would be the wrong thing for the Leafs to do. And I'm sure the guys who are paid a lot more money and have a lot more experience at this understand that as well.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, tonight Leafs Habs preseason game, 7 o'clock. Puck drop down at Scotiabank Arena. I think it's actually going to be on TSN 1050 where you can listen to it. I don't can't recall if TSN or Sportsnet probably has the game for the Leafs, and the Habs probably has the TSN probably has the Habs feed, because I believe that's how things end up working when it comes to the way they split it up, market share and whatnot. All right, I think we're gonna take a pause and end the show there, Dave. Good stuff. We got through a lot. It was kind of there's some important updates that we had to make in that show. That'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You'd subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcast platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with an episode tomorrow. We'll be recapping the preseason game between the Leafs and Habs tonight. Enjoy the game. Until then, keep locked right here on Locked On Leafs.